Hello everyone, Melanie here with CGL Recruiting again, and I am very excited about today's video. Today we're going to talk to somebody who has an amazing story about not only getting a job in the government and how he did that and how you can do it too, but we're also going to talk with him about his journey of pivoting into this government role. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Jason. Jason, let me add you in here. There he is. Jason, you have the most amazing story. And I'm so excited for job seekers who are struggling, as you well know, in this environment, to tell them that you can pivot and change industries and wind up with a great career. So can you kind of tell us your story about where you were and where you are today?
Sure. So I was laid off in December of 2019 by Total. At the time, layoffs hadn't really been hitting, and COVID was still something that we kept in the U.S. We were hearing that was out in some other countries. We were starting to see some of the stuff going on in Italy, but Total, being a European country, was already feeling the effects. And unfortunately, the deal that I had to get moved to into Paris had fell through, and we got laid off, and it happened to several employees there. I, at the time, was a senior geologist working for them. I was their geologic advisor for all unconventional research that they were working on. And it was very unexpected, but we were fortunate in a lot of ways that they handled the layoff very well. They provided us a wonderful severance package, took care of our children for the time. But it was also a time where things were starting to come apart a little bit globally. We were starting to see what was about to come. Oil and gas companies in particular knew what was happening internationally, and so there wasn't a lot of hiring at the time. It was a very difficult time frame, particularly for the oil and gas major companies. So I had spent, prior to my time at Total, I had spent 10.5 years at ExxonMobil, left there, spent 7 months at Total where I got laid off. I was able to find a couple of jobs actually early on with some smaller companies, and by the first week of March, I had 2 job offers. They were great companies, small companies, but it was that same week that the job offers came in that COVID was really starting to come out in New York City, and the Russians and the Saudis went in front of the oil markets. And so I had 2 job offers by Wednesday. By the following Monday, they were both revoked.
And you know, you're not alone in that. There's been a lot of job seekers that had great offers and then they were pulled away.
Yep. And, you know, one of them, it was kind of my fault in a way, I'd say in a way, but I was negotiating with the company for vacation time. And the job offer was on the table, and I was still waiting just to get, they were going to want me to cut back to 2 weeks vacation, and I was going from having 5 at Total. So we were negotiating back and forth on how the leave was going to work, and I waited 2 days too long to sign the offer. So I had no legal recourse in that. Hindsight being 2020, of course. But the offers both got revoked, and we were kind of left with uh-oh, what now? That we realized that same week was when the national closures went into place. Driving home from practice with my son's baseball team on the day that the offer got revoked was the day that we got news that the Houston Rodeo was being shut down. It was also the same NBA.
Big deal for those of you not in Texas. Yep. It is a massive thing. People come in from all over for that thing, but yeah, it was a big deal here.
And that was also the same day the NBA was shut down. And so they got home that night. I looked at my wife and said, "We got a problem, man. This short. We thought this might be over. We might be moving on, and with my career, and realized quite suddenly that it wasn't going to be a career for a while. We were going to have to do some long, hard searches and long, hard looks at what it is I was going to be able to do with the skill sets I have." There were a couple of things that went through my mind at the time. Certainly started to look at how people who were there were a lot of layoffs going on at that time, not really with the majors yet, but with the smaller oil and gas companies. They laid, as soon as the Russians and Saudis did what they did, the layoffs started happening immediately within the smaller companies. And a lot of people were starting to talk at that time about transitioning out of oil and gas. This had been the second layoff in the last 4 years, kind of the third or fourth cycle in the last 10. People were starting to say this is this might be starting to be a period of time where oil and gas is not going to be as stable as many of us hoped when we joined it, thinking that maybe, some lessons had been learned from the 80s and 90s. They weren't. And read about people transitioning into places like data science, project management, other careers. And I dabbled my foot in that a little bit and, took some courses online and ultimately came to realize I'm a geologist. It's just what I am. And I can't imagine being anything else. I'm one of the very few people. I was a geologist the day I started college. I was a geology major from day one. Went all the way through my PhD. It's what I am. It's what I love to do. I'm very fortunate. I get to do for a living what I love to do. And so
you figured that out, and you had that moment. Okay, data science is not for me. So you still had to figure out how to pivot some.
Absolutely.
And so where did that get you to where you are today?
So two things started to happen. One was there was a lot of people, a lot of geologists that were starting to realize that the support for us as geoscientists at the time amongst organizations wasn't really there. Because not only were geoscientists being laid off, but so were engineers. And engineers have big, large national networks that are not just associated with oil and gas. And they were jumping in and providing support for them to transition into new careers and use their engineering skills that can be applied across multiple industries. Right. Geoscientists that are stuck, that I should say stuck, that's a bad choice of words there, but geoscientists that chose to pursue careers in oil and gas versus other options such as environmental or other fields where our skill sets can be applied tend to not be looked at seriously because many other industries believe that we will jump ship as soon as oil and gas comes back for salary purposes. And historically, that has been rather true. But the oil and gas geological associations were not providing a lot of support at the time for geoscientists to transition out of oil and gas. And that was because a big part of it is they receive a lot of their funding from the major oil and gas companies. And they didn't want people going into other careers and then having to be bought back and having to relocation and everything else. There was we understood where it was coming from. So we started to form a group of us together on LinkedIn, a lot of chat, a lot of resume helps, little things that became a major LinkedIn support network that we now run. But we started talking in those conversations, started to hear that, hey, there are jobs available with the US government. And there's some very good jobs with the US government. And I'd always known about the USGS. They're a phenomenal organization. This is ultimately where I got hired to, United States Geological Survey. But didn't realize that they were actually hiring and didn't even know how to go about identifying those jobs. And through some networking and seeing people on LinkedIn posting some links as we were, more and more of us were becoming laid off and more of us were trying to advance our profiles on LinkedIn. We networked and identified people like Melanie and others who were posting opportunities out there. I came across the website where this is all posted. It's called usajobs.gov, usajobs.gov. And went on there. My first search, there were 13 positions open for geologists across a multitude of U.S. agencies. They included the United States Geological Survey, which for research geologists like myself is an ideal place to end up. But there were also jobs at the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which Bureau of Land Management is we hear a lot about right now. That is where a lot of the fracking debates are going on right now. And they were looking for geologists to come in for a consulting on how much is actually there do they have on their properties? Is it worth even pursuing? And what would the impacts be to those lands? So I actually got an interview with them for one of those positions. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which handles all the lease sales in places like the Gulf of Mexico or in Alaska. They were interviewing for geologists. They were recognizing that they needed to bring people in for that when the rebound does occur, they have everything in place because there will be, when the rebound occurs, they will be asked to have lease sales available. The Army Corps of Engineers always hiring geologists. They're always looking for people. They need people who understand the bedrock and the soil types that are doing their construction. So there are every day I look, there's 2 or 3 Army Corps of Engineer jobs available for geologists.
So how was this, because your whole career before then was in the oil and gas though. So how is the job application different? for those that are interested in doing this application into these government roles? What were the differences in it?
So that was the next step, of course, right? Is okay, how do I apply? And I had just gone through the interview process with Total. I wasn't that far out of when I started. I started with Total in June of 2019. So I had, my resume was in pretty good shape. My interview skills were in pretty good shape, but the federal government has a very different set of protocols. You don't just send a resume to a hiring manager or a recruiter for the company. You have to go onto the website and you have to go through an entire screening process for each job. And the screening process is pretty rigorous. There's most of them have about 15 to 20 questions where you have to rank yourself. And to be honest, you have to be able to understand what the question is asking and how you can finagle yourself into having done what they're asking if you've done. And for example, I had a question on the BLM one, which said, have I worked under the Environmental Regulation Act? And I forget exactly which act it was that they asked about. And what I realized was I hadn't actually submitted documentation under that, but I prepared environmental impact statements on every well I ever drilled onshore US.
Right.
Yes, I did work under that act without actually being a direct. And so I learned how to use my background to think about how to answer these questions so that I wasn't lying, certainly, but I was utilizing my background to make sure I got my foot in the door.
That is so key, right? I mean, that is the crux of this is any industry you're trying to change, Jason, it's trying to figure out how you pick everything that you bring special and how it applies to them. And it's out of the box sometimes because it's easy to say no. But you went the extra step and said, okay, let me back up and think how I make that connection for them.
And that came from getting, so they have a, once you submit your application, it takes time. I mean, let me stress that too, okay? Just to give the whole quick brief background, for the job I eventually got with the USGS, I applied for that job on March 29th. The applications were due April 1st. I didn't start till September 14th. So it's a long, arduous process with a lot of federal bureaucracy. And be prepared to understand that and deal with that.
How long was it from, so you applied in March. How long was it till you actually got your first call from them for an interview?
The first call came the last weekend of May. And my first interview was the second week of June. I then went 2 weeks, got a call back for a second interview, which I did the second week of July, and was given the offer by the last week of July.
Anytime there's a government job, there tends to be a longer posting process. Yes. Where they truly are trying to get making sure they're getting a diverse candidate pool and they're giving everybody, even internally, that opportunity to apply. And so I think people get very frustrated when they do apply for those government positions that I put something in 2 months ago and I haven't heard anything. It doesn't mean that you're not still in consideration.
Absolutely.
And you have to have loads of irons in the fire, right? When you're a job seeker and be working this and hopefully one of those comes to fruition. What job seekers you don't know about, Jason, is you went after this like a man with a critical mission to Mars, because not only did you start, not only for yourself, but to help all your fellow geologists. You started an entire group for them with resources. You brought in speakers for them, helping them with all of their resume and understanding different facets of how to apply for positions. You joined OCI and we're doing a leadership position in a local chapter, which helped increase your network. How many hours a week do you think you were spending total on your job search when you were out?
I would dare say, if you include all of the networking work that I did with the group on LinkedIn, as well as job applications, follow-up emails, it had to be 60 to 80 hours a week.
I agree. If you told me like 40, I was going to say you're lying. I saw you. There's not many people who are on LinkedIn at 2 a.m. with me. That's always posting out there and doing stuff.
I've kind of joked that I've actually been able to relax now. I'm working less now than I'm working.
I agree. It's you have to go after it with that full force. And I commend you for all the work that you did, because you have impacted, not only yourself in getting this great job. So what's your title in this role you're doing now?
So I am a research sedimentologist with the United States Geological Survey. And
congratulations, that is brilliant. But you also have helped an incredible amount of people find jobs and get the skills they need, and also just to have hope and motivation throughout the process, Jason. And so on behalf of all of them, thank you for all the great work that you have done.
It's been a pleasure. I've made friends that never would have had. It's been a lot of, I could not have gotten through it myself without having that group of people as my support network. So I hope we gave back to them what they've given to me.
So if you had to pick now, looking back on this process and applying for those government jobs, we talked about being able to translate your experience. What other two things do you think it is absolutely critical for job seekers to think different when they're applying for these jobs, either during the interview process, the follow-up, any part of it?
You have to be prepared for the difference in the interview process. The federal jobs are not going to read off of your resume. They are actually not allowed. So I learned that lesson the hard way in my first interview, which I bombed. I was awful at my first interview with the BLM. I was prepared for a standard, company job interview where they were going to have my resume in front of me. I know what the strengths of my resume are. I know what the weaknesses of my resume are. And I've been through those interviews and I know how to answer all those questions. And they come on and tell me, okay, there's 4 of us. You're going to get 12 questions. Every interviewer gets the same questions and go. And it was a very bureaucratic, what are your strengths? Have you worked on this? What do you know about our organization? I was not prepared for that. I think that was the biggest thing to understand. They cannot read off your resume when they're asking you questions. They will on follow-ups. And so what I learned was the catchphrases they were looking for certain questions that would direct them to my resume for a follow-up. And a big one for the research sedimentologist position. I knew right away going into that interview where they were going to come from. I read the job description in excruciating detail.
And they're long too, right?
They're very long. But that would be another thing to recommend. Was what I learned is I ended up having 5 different federal interviews. So I presented myself pretty well. I at least got my foot in the door to a lot of places. The questions they ask generally come straight out of the job description if you read it in enough detail. And so by my 3rd or 4th interview, I was able to already predict most of the questions. And I learned how to drive the answers to those questions back to my resume, so the follow-ups then went to my strengths. That was a key skill to figure out early on in this process. Fortunately, the USGS interview was my 3rd one. It was also one where I was much more comfortable because it was the job description fit my skill sets to a T. Okay. So that helped as well. But that's a big thing. Know the job description and anticipate the questions that are going to come. They're not going to come off your resume, but be able to address what the job is searching for, how they may ask a question back to your resume so that the follow-ups hit your strengths.
So the structure inside is a little different than inside a traditional company. So who was the first person that reached out to you? Was that a recruiter, internal recruiter? Was it somebody part of the hiring manager's staff?
So I would be the administrator for whichever group it was I was interviewing for would send me an email on behalf of the hiring manager. Okay. Set up an interview time. It was very quick, that way was very efficient. There wasn't a lot of steps. It was, hi, for the USGS, the lady's name is Miriam Cura. My name is Miriam Cura. I'm reaching out to you on behalf of the lady who's now my supervisor for an interview for the research sedimentologist job. When are you? We have this time. If this doesn't work for you, let us know when.
So that's nice, right? Because you didn't feel like you had to get through that initial whole talent acquisition group. You went straight to the hiring manager's staff. So that was an advantage for you.
Yes, and what I've learned is that the hiring staff for these positions, they do a lot of work. Part of what takes so long is there's a very detailed screening process that goes through on these that has all sorts of things, and there are also, if you're a veteran, veterans get preference for all federal jobs. So there's a big screening of veterans versus non-veterans, and how to handle the difference between the qualifications and the veteran status and veteran spousal status. So that's a lot of that is done so far in advance before you get to the interview process. By the time you got there, you've been well screened, and that is a big advantage of these jobs. They know a lot about you when you're going to the interview.
That's good, though. I mean, it's a different look, right, than the other, but that seems like that really worked, and you felt it was a really good personalized process, even though it was a little bit long.
Absolutely, yeah. In the end, once I understood how it was working, I became much more comfortable. I certainly admit the 3-month wait between submitting my application and getting the interview drove me a little nuts, because I identified this job as one that I very much wanted to pursue. The other thing, though, most of the jobs on the USA Jobs website will give you a link to a contact at the organization in which you're applying. Some don't. Army Corps does not do this, but Department of Interior does, Department of Energy does, the EPA does, which other places I've applied to on there. And you can actually email the HR contacts listed on the job description, and they'll tell you what's going on, how far out they are from making decisions.
So when because you applied for more than one job, so for the ones that you did not get, did they close the loop with you and let you know?
Yes, they do. You will not get much in the way of back. I know one in particular I did not get because a veteran did get the job. So that's, but you will not know. You'll just get a letter saying you're not offered the position. Thank you for interviewing. We very much enjoyed your time. Your resume is still on file. If you want to pursue further opportunities, we encourage you to do so.
It was still nice though that you got that close of the loop, right?
You get to close.
A lot of job seekers. Yeah. Okay, so overlooking at this entire process, if there was one last thing that you had to tell people, job seekers, about your path of looking for a job, making this industry pivot change, and then applying for the government jobs, what's the one bit of advice, Jason, that you would give them?
I think I go back to something I talked earlier about, which is that when I was deciding on what path I was going to pursue, I decided I was a geologist, and I was going to be a geologist. And I think if you're going to pivot, whichever way you're going to pivot, don't pivot to something that will just be a job for you. Pivot to something you're going to be able to give the same passion that you gave to your career, because the job search will require you to have the passion to get the job. It's very competitive right now, and they're going to notice things that if you're just doing it to take a job. One of the things that they talked about to me with USGS was that when I gave my interview talk, because my second interview was a 25-minute presentation, they could just tell I knew what I was talking about, and I loved talking about it. And I think that really does separate you. If you're going to pursue something with a passion, it stands out. And so if you want to go to data science and you truly love doing data science, wholeheartedly go after it. But if it's just going to be, I'm doing it because I need a job, that will also show itself in this highly competitive market.
Absolutely. All right, Jason. Well, congratulations again on this amazing new role. They are incredibly fortunate to have you. And thank you for being willing to do this and to share your expertise with all of the job seekers who are still in the trenches working hard to find that next role.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to join you today.
All right, job seekers, as always, if you have any questions for me or for Jason, please go ahead and put them in the comments down below. We do look at each and every one and try to respond as quick as we can. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.